Hi, everybody, and welcome to 2024's LTUE Edge of the Universe event. It's great to be back, and we have a great lineup for you this year. Just a couple of things to point out to help you navigate. Our full schedule is available on the LTUE website or in the links and event schedule channels of our Discord server. Please feel free to join us at any time. The link to join the Discord is on the main page for LTUE, and that is at ltue.net. So to start us off, we have Danny Potter with us. His presentation is Muse on Demand, Creativity and the Neuropsychology of the Creative Mind. Take it away.
Hi. I'm really glad to be back with LTUE. My LTUE tribe, I've moved 2,000 miles away so that I could get affordable housing, which I found. But I lost my writing tribe. I'm hoping to make it back soon. But for those of you who don't know me, I did some presentations a couple of years ago. A couple, more like, gosh, I guess like 6 or 7. And I absolutely love LTUE. A little bit about me. There's a bit in my bio. Most of it was a little bit outdated. My life has been pretty hectic, and I haven't had time to update it. I'm a mental health counselor and a therapist. I'm here in my own office. I've just barely set up my own practice, which means right when I was preparing for this LTUE presentation, I was also trying to get my business off the ground. So I'm afraid I don't have the slides to go with everything. What I'm really trying to do in this presentation is cram 2 presentations into one. It's going to be very fire hose, very rapid fire. Go ahead and put the comments in the chat. I'm going to try to leave time for that at about 22, and then we have to wrap it up at about 10:02. I'm really excited to talk about this. Okay, I'm going to minimize my video feed a little bit. Okay, now our brains, I've got a little model of the brain over here. Our brains are very massively complicated things. It takes up about 3 or 4% of our body's mass, but uses 25% of its calories. It commands everything else that we do. It's the why and the way that we interpret the world. We like to think that we are a single entity, but it's a lot more complicated than that. It's more like we act like a hive mind. We can all act together in concert, but we also have all of these little functions that are constantly running. For example, as we're speaking right now, if all of a sudden something were to start burning in the background, you'd notice it as you smell it because your brain is constantly filtering and scanning all of the smells that you can smell, the temperature that you can feel. If it starts to heat up or get cooler in your room, something you're likely to notice. If all of a sudden a car screeches to a halt outside, you're going to notice that because you're scanning all of the background sounds. The brain does so many things all at once. Even while it's doing all of that, you're hearing my voice, interpreting what I'm saying. Your brain is predicting the end of the sentence before I get there just to try to be ahead of the game. You're watching the way that I move my hands, the way that my face is moving. All of this is going on. Now, why do I start there? I start there because we tend to have ideas about when we get stuck, when we have writer's block, when we're struggling to come up with a new idea. Something along these lines. We tend to give ourselves an explanation for what is actually going on. But it's usually a lot more complicated than that. Now, I want to kind of start by dividing creative people into 2 different types. Now, there are 2 types of people in the world. The type of person that divides everyone into 2 types of person, the type that doesn't. And of course, this is all, nobody is perfectly divided into just these 2 categories. So most of us are a mixture of both, but I wanted to kind of describe both because they're kind of 2 different types of why we get stuck in creativity. One is structured. These are the people who they write a story all the way to the end and they say, now I'm looking for a new story. And they spend a while trying to develop a new idea. Now, I would say this type of writer is not the average. Then there's what I call chaotic. This is me. I have a Facebook group called Scribleptics Anonymous. And Scribleptic, of course, is someone who is prone to fits and seizures of writing. And that's the way that I think a lot of the writer community is. This is someone who is kind of here, there, and everywhere. And they tend, instead of trying to spend a while finding a new story. They try to find the time and the willpower to write any one of the thousands of ideas that they have. These are two successful types. I've known very successful authors who are of both types, but they tend to be very different from one another. One says, well, why are you having a hard time writing the story? You have the idea, you know the characters, you know the plot, you just put it down on the paper. And the other one says, how in the world am I ever going to finish one of these stories? So I kind of want to delve into this a little bit. When we look at creativity and what creativity is, I think it's really important to understand we're not coming up with, technically, an original idea. I'm going to share my screen here, because this is kind of the best way to explain what I want to describe. All right. All right. Now, this guy here, this is the mantis shrimp. Some of you might know a little bit about him. He's a very colorful guy. He's known for having the strongest punch in the animal kingdom. He's a predator, and that's how he kills his prey. He literally punches them, or punches the water near them. However, what I want to focus on are the mantis shrimp's eyes. Oh, okay. It's going to have me reshare as I switch to the next image. There we go. The mantis shrimp's eyes. These three separate holes let in three entirely different wavelengths of light. This shrimp can see microwave and infrared, possibly X-ray. I don't know all the things that it can see, but it can see far beyond the color spectrum that we're limited to. It can see all of these parts of light that we're blind to. And the second that I heard that, the instant thing that I thought is, what do those colors look like? And there's literally no way for us to know. We can't come up with something completely original, completely unrelated to anything that we've ever encountered. So what creativity actually is it's a juxtaposition of two things that aren't usually put together, or aren't commonly put together. We see the development of certain ideas, and oftentimes the early ones are a little bit more famous or more popular. Lord of the Rings was a big deal because there wasn't really, arguably, there wasn't really epic fantasy in the way that we know it today. There's a big debate as to what the first novel was, whether it was really Cervantes writing Don Quixote, or whether it was really the Tale of Gilgamesh 3,000 years before that. Should we include the Odyssey, because he didn't technically write that down? So that type of thing, either way, it's one of the earlier times that a story was presented in this way. So when we have a look at, okay, we take different ideas and we put them together. If we're going to start first with the what I consider the structured writer's dilemma, where it's like, okay, I need to come up with a new idea. I need something that is creative. So in this instance, the way that we can help overcome this type of a dry spell is you kind of mix up your inputs. Oftentimes we'll just sit down and go, okay, where do I start? Sorry, I just read the comment that popped up in chat. So we say, where do I start? I would say the first thing is you need to feed your brain stuff to be creative fodder. Once you fill your brain full of massive amounts of information, you can start to put some things together. This is one of the reasons why people with ADHD are so often creatively minded, is because with ADHD, we're more likely to, and ADHD, ADD, it depends on whether you talk to someone more psychologically based or more medically based, whether they say ADD or ADHD. I use ADHD as the umbrella term for both hyperactive and distractible. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. This is a brain which is very thirsty for any kind of input, for any kind of stimulus. So it's looking for it absolutely everywhere. This is the type of person who, for no reason at all, will jump down a rabbit hole and study the entire history of mafia in the United States of America. And then 2 weeks later, all of a sudden we're, deep in a rabbit hole of, well, I just discovered that the Cowboy War was a thing. And now I'm investigating the rise of the Pinkerton Agency. And all of a sudden, all of this stuff gets put together, and all of these little bits are just floating around in a brain that is hopping from one subject to another, bringing little bits and primings and promptings of each one. This is why the chaotic brain often doesn't really struggle that much with the aspect of putting things together creatively. So if you do, put a lot more stuff in. Find an aspect of life that you're interested in, whether it's biology. There's a reason I know about mantis shrimp. I'm highly ADHD. Study astronomy, physics, medicine, law, culture, rare medical disorders, weird rocks. As you do this, then ask yourself, what would happen if I were to change one thing? Or what would happen if I were to put this in a situation where it's going to wildly change the landscape? So, for example, let's say that we have and I used this one on the last presentation that I did, so bear with me if you've already heard it. Let's say that you have a private detective who, because I've studied some rare disorders, I know about prosopagnosia, which is face blindness. You can't recognize someone's face. So you have a private detective who won't recognize people by their face. This private detective, however, if you think about and you investigate this, you start to think about elements of this. This private detective is very likely to know the full aspect of someone's wardrobe, be able to recognize the cars that they drive, the way that they walk, the way that they use their hands, scars on their fingers, the way that they smell, other areas they might be hyper attentive to. Or, there's the classic of the blind swordsman who can hear where your sword is coming, or something along those lines, the blind warrior at any rate. These are ideas that kind of spark that. Or you take a culture that maybe existed 2,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, and you're like, but what if they ran into this other culture that I was reading about from 1200s Mongolia, because they have this really interesting dynamic that would blend and mesh in a really fascinating way. So when we start to take these two things and place them together, we start to come up with ideas. Now, it's not just about filling your brain full of stuff. That's an excellent start. But then you also need to fill your brain full of interesting, creative things. Read authors that are similar to how you would like to write. I, for example, would love my aspiration in life is to be compared to a poor man's Terry Pratchett. I know I'm never going to be Terry Pratchett, but I want to be a poor man's Terry Pratchett. And so when I'm wanting to write something that's a little bit more humorous, like Terry Pratchett does, maybe that's not the time that I'm, say, reading Dean Koontz's most action-packed thriller where there's almost never a joke told. Maybe that's not the time when I'm reading John Grisham. Maybe I'm going to stick to something a little bit more like what I want to inspire. So let's see. As you do that, read that story and ask, what is compelling about this for me? And you can then start to structure that in, or it might inspire an idea. Like you're just reading this and you're like, okay, this person has this interesting world build. It would be fascinating if there was an Aztec-like culture which had this style of religious belief, and you draw it from the other thing that you were studying. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to be a master of all things, but as you read, stop and carefully, in a contrived manner, you can spark that creative muse by stopping and going, okay, this thing that I'm reading is fascinating to me. What about it is so interesting to me? Because if you're interested by it, likely another reader would be interested too. Do the same thing with what you're reading. What is it about this reading that grabs me? What is it about this passage that I love so much? And then put that all together and you start to come up with the story that you want. You start to find the characters that you relate to. You start to find the devices that this author is using that are really working for you. Now, the vast majority of you are likely going to be a little bit more towards the chaotic side of writer. This is the type where, when we're sitting down, what we're struggling with is mental resistance. It's the fear of the blank page, the just simply writer's block. I don't know how to start myself writing the next piece, or I find myself constantly distracted. When I sit down to write is when I have my house at the absolute cleanest, and when all of my dishes are done and I still haven't done any writing. Or when I'm trying to find just the exact right playlist to lay out. What is it that's keeping us from writing? All right. Now here, let me see how I want to do this. Let's do it this way. I like whiteboards. So here's my whiteboard. Okay. So I'm going to try to come a little bit closer here and raise this to bring my microphone a little bit closer to me. Can somebody tell me in chat if you guys can still hear me okay? Yes? No?
I can hear you just fine.
Can we still hear? Oh. Okay. Okay. Fantastic. All right. So this is a model of the brain that I came up with. I call it the cubicle model of the brain. Now, if you've ever worked in a cubicle, first of all, my condolences to you. They absolutely suck the life out of you. They're horrible places. Hopefully you haven't because of the work at home movement, and I'm hoping that COVID helped to cure the cubicle epidemic. But the way that I like to describe it when I'm describing it to clients, this can be why we have mental health issues. This can be how addiction works, but this is also why we're struggling to sit down and write. So, like I say, we like to think of ourselves as just a single entity, but in reality, it's more like over here on this raised dais, you've got the conscious mind. This is the big boss. Now, the big boss has this screen in front of him. Now, please try not to be distracted by my incredible artistic skill. I know it's very very lifelike, photorealistic, but try not to be distracted by my artistic talent. So this is the conscious mind. The conscious mind is the only one that can be heard throughout the work floor, the cubicle floor. They have this microphone here, and it's just basically reading every memo that pops up on the screen out loud. Now, this is only reading out loud what makes it to the conscious mind. Here's what happens before that. You got this cubicle where you have all of these subcortices of the brain. Here are their little heads popping over their cubicles. And they're all sitting down there just working on their own stuff. They're managing their calls, they're doing their emails, whatever they're doing. And the guys next to each other, well, they can hear a little bit, overhear a little bit of the conversation going on. But the boss is the only one that has the PA system. Now, sometimes some of these people are going to be so distracted and caught up with what they're doing, they might not be part of this whole conversation. So down here, we have anxiety. Now, anxiety all of a sudden starts to crop up, prompted by, we'll get to that later, but all of a sudden, I'm starting to get anxious about this writing. Well, then that pans over to alarm. Alarm is the only loudmouth that can be heard by almost everybody. And so it just kind of starts to go, ah! Now, the problem is, the one who notices the error, notices the anxiety, doesn't necessarily come communicated through alarm. So over here, we have the troubleshooter. You probably can't read anything that I'm doing. But over here, we have the troubleshooter. The troubleshooter hears alarm go off and goes, wait a second. Let me try to figure out what exactly is going wrong. So then we check the archive. We go back into memory and we say, what exactly is going on? So then memory says, you know what? Last time we were hungry and we ate something and it felt better. So maybe the alarm is going off because we're hungry. All of a sudden, I need a snack. So I have to get up and go do the snack. Or all of a sudden, archive goes, hey, you know what? We have this whole to-do list that we're trying to remember, especially if you struggle with ADHD. You always feel like you need to get everything done. The second that you have something that isn't the most productive, it's like, okay, I just need to take care of this other thing that I consider to be work before I do this thing that I consider to be fun work. So then we try to eat the frog first is the term. We try to do the work thing first. So, okay, I need to clean my room. I need to do my dishes. I need to alphabetize condiments in my refrigerator, whatever it is that we're doing that seems so vitally important over top of whatever we're doing, then that's what comes in as the memo. And then our conscious mind goes, hey, I have this other thing that I need to do. Or, hey, you know what? I want to avoid doing this because I'm really hungry, or I need to find the right playlist, or whatever the thing is. Or, hey, I'll just do, one round of mahjong, or I'll just do a little bit of solitaire. I'll just watch one video on TikTok or YouTube or whatever it is, and immediately we're gone. We're off of this. Now, let's talk about what can be going on to stop us there. All right. And what we can do about it. All right. So, first off, we need to understand that there's not always a simple brain hack. I'm going to give you a huge list of them, but there's not always a simple brain hack to fight it. The resistance is often because we have some amount of anxiety, either with what we're about to write or with writing at all. I think it was, I want to say it was Dan Wells. It was a quote that I wrote down, and I'm sorry if I'm misattributing this, from a presenter at Facebook that said, writers are the strangest combination of grandiosity and imposter syndrome and self-loathing that you'll ever find. It's just this odd blend, and we do tend to be. It's like, I'm a fabulous writer, and then the next time we read it, I'm the worst writer ever. Then we leave it for 3 months, and we come back and we're like, I'm a fabulous writer. So maybe in that moment, you're experiencing a little bit of anxiety, almost performance anxiety, that you're not going to be addressing it properly. To be able to solve this, rush write. Don't be afraid to write crap. You just sit down. Don't let yourself stop writing. You can start out by just saying, and I don't really know what to write here, and then you just start to express it. You start to put it out. Or you just start to have your character say all kinds of strange things, and then all of a sudden he jumped up on the box. Simple as that. Just move on to the next bit. You can come back and revise that later. Once you get it out, it's a lot easier to come back and well, in a lot of cases, it's a lot easier to come back and reapproach it. Be like, okay, now I definitely know what I'm doing wrong here. All right. So I would say, first of all, try to figure out what exactly is stopping you. Is it that anxiety that you might not be doing it right? Is it, in fact, just that you are usually distracted? Because that can be the entire thing. When teaching people to quit smoking, for example, we discovered that about 70% of the craving for addiction is not to do with nicotine levels in the bloodstream. It's to do with the behavioral things that you move along and do. And that's what prompts your body to start looking for the nicotine. Hey, usually at this point, I'm smoking. So that's when I want to start smoking. There's a wonderful book called What Makes Your Brain Happy and Why You Should Do the Opposite. And it talks about this. Your brain is not designed to help you reach your goals. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. It's designed to repeat what you did last time because that helped you to survive. That's what your brain is supposed to do. It's supposed to make sure that you survive. The safest way to do that is to repeat what we did yesterday. So, when we try to figure out what the anxiety is that maybe prompted us yesterday to avoid it, is it maybe I'm not pleased with the last scene that I wrote? I'm not trying to get you stuck in a revision cycle, but if you know that, put a bookmark in it and say, okay, I'm going to come back to that when I finish the piece. I'm going to move on. Is it that you don't know what's going to happen in the scene? Now, this is where pantsers start to get, okay, this is not for me, and check out. Now, I was completely a pantser. If you're new to writing, a pantser is flying by the seat of your pants. You don't really know what's going to happen in the scene. You don't know where the story's going. You're just making it up on the fly. And I was 100% a pantser. And then I took one of Brandon Sanderson's class, and he teaches a very structured, organized, I at BYU. I don't know if he still lectures there, but I took one of his classes there. Fantastic class. He teaches a very structured, organized, plotting type of writing. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I'll give it a try. Best thing I ever did for my writing. Beforehand, I found revisions annoying. But once I learned what the revision really was like, and I learned, like, it used to be if I knew how the story was going to end, I didn't have any desire to finish the story. But it absolutely transformed my writing because I got to find the joy of learning to craft in a very different way. So if you don't know what's going on with the next scene, then maybe your pantser skills are not good enough to get you through that next little bit. And you need to do just a bit of outlining. You need to figure out, okay, maybe it's I don't know this character well enough. Maybe it's I don't know how to write this type of a thing. So once we figure out what that fear is that's stopping it, then we move forward. We can figure out what to do about it. Now, here's the other one. ADHD people, oftentimes, if I know what I want to write, I sit down. Sometimes it gets boring to write it. What do we do at that point? Now, it's not just ADHD people. Lots of us sit down. It's like, okay, the story is fun. I like writing the story. I like reading the story. Maybe I even like revising the story. But I like creating a story, but I don't like the actual writing process. That is the difficult part. Now, this is where we introduce willpower because we can learn to adapt to that. And oftentimes we try to quit too early. It didn't work this time. It didn't work last time. It didn't work the time before. I guess that just doesn't work for me. But oftentimes, if we continue on with it, we try to work on it. I've got a whole reading list here that I'd love to share at the end. And one of them is The Mind and the Brain, Neuroplasticity and the Power of Mental Force. And it talks about the simple power of intent. If I intend to change this thing about myself, going back to the cubicle model, that's the boss reading out onto the call floor, hey, this is what we're actually trying to do. This is where we're actually trying to aim. How do we get that message to all of these parts of the brain that are trying to run away? Here's the fun part. Get bored. Get bored. Sit there and be bored. If you can't force yourself to write, force yourself to do nothing else. This is the difference between willpower and won't power. Another part in the reading list that I recommend, Willpower Instinct by Dr. Kelly McGonigal. teaches at Stanford, world's expert on willpower. Fantastic. Willpower and won't power both have an energy budget to them. And sometimes we've used up a lot of our willpower budget, and maybe it's more difficult than usual to overcome that resistance and do the thing. But if I instead use my won't power budget, a slightly separate budget, and I'm going to say, okay, I am not going to do anything else. I'm not going to do the snack. I'm not going to do the playlist. I'm not going to do just quickly check my that little red dot on Facebook that shows me I have notifications, or Instagram, or whatever you do. I'm not going to scroll through a couple of videos on TikTok. I'm just going to do the thing. I'm going to do nothing else. You sit there and all of a sudden you start to get bored. Now, there are two really important components to this. Number one, I'm sorry, ADHD people, when you are bored, you are at your most creative. You can measure the way that the brain activates, and it goes into what is often called default mode. It starts to throw random things together, but it also gets us massively frustrated if we don't like being bored. And then we all of a sudden just feel this build, this urge, I need to go and do something. So what do? Well, the thing that's right in front of me, maybe. So I need to do something. Oftentimes we find it very, very difficult to do the thing that we know that we need to do or that we want to do, but we just can't seem to bring ourselves to do it. It's much easier to not do all the other things at some points. Okay. Then I say, change up your whole writing process. If you're someone who does a playlist and you're struggling with creativity, try it without a playlist. If you're someone without a playlist, try adding a playlist. If you do it with snacks, try doing it without. If you stand to write, try other things, or try taking the laptop onto the bed or whatever. Turn on the lights or turn them off. Now, interestingly, turning off lights does tend to boost most people's creativity. They measured it at, I think it was 150 lumens is what they wanted people to have to be at peak creativity. Now, that's not going to work for everyone, and sometimes just the change of adding or taking away light can be the big thing for you. Try going to a different place. If you're ADHD, sometimes you need a body double, like an accountability partner. I'm going to go sit beside my wife while she's doing her own thing, whatever it is, and I'm going to write. And because she's there, it's not even that I think that she's looking, it's just because she's there, I'm not nearly as tempted to do other things. It can be simple as go to Starbucks, and all of a sudden you have 100 body doubles around you. Sometimes we just need that extra thing going. Let's see. Aha. Now here's one. This is one that is going to be difficult, but also very useful. If you're really struggling because you find that you do have time to write, but you spend it doing other things, you just might be a little burned out. We tend to be attracted to stimulus for entertainment. In today's world, more than ever before, way more than the last time that I gave this presentation, we get stuck in these, what I call dopamine traps. Now, we used to think that dopamine was a pleasure chemical, but it's not. It's a motivator chemical. And that would motivate us to go seek pleasure, which is why we thought it was involved in pleasure, highly involved in addiction, again, why we thought it was pleasure. But dopamine spikes so much higher than all of the pleasure chemicals do when someone takes a drug, which is why they constantly feel like they're chasing a high. Like they get the promise that the reward is going to be up here. That's the motivator, but then it only reaches here. So then they take more and the pleasure gets to here, but now the motivation's up here. Next time, if you just take some more, then you'll get to that peak. But we do the same thing in limited doses. When we see that little red dot appear that, hey, you got a notification, you've got an unread message, you got whatever it is, someone posted a new video. There's all these other things that constantly bombard us. Each one of those allocates dopamine to bring us to that. Paying attention uses willpower. Willpower is basically just attention. It is focusing all of more parts of the brain on one single goal at one single time. The more distracted you are, the more multitasking you are, the more active you are throughout the day, the more that's going to tax your ability to focus on one specific object and one specific thing. Try to arrange your time so that you're writing when you have energy, when you are not hungry, when you haven't just made yourself do something difficult. Try to arrange your time so that you're at more peaks of dopamine so that you can try to engage in that. But second, fast from dopamine. This is good for your mental health. This is good for your life. This is good for your relationships. This is good for almost everything. Take all of the little garbage things that we do. The way that I heard it was, okay, we're still okay for time. A trauma therapist was discussing secondhand trauma. Well, a crisis therapist. This is the type of therapist who sees somebody immediately after they are interrogated by the cops when they've seen their whole family slaughtered. Immediately after they just find out that they are going to die. They get that diagnosis that you have this terminal illness, you have 2 weeks left to live, something along those lines. The absolute deepest. These are the victims immediately after the attack. These are the hardest to encounter and to contact. Now, as a therapist, you take home a lot of this sometimes. So this was kind of a lesson on how to not take it home. What you can also read in here is how to preserve some of your mental energy. Now, he talked about he would come home and he'd just watch what he called garbage reality TV. And it would take his mind away from his stresses and his problems. These days, a lot of us are overworked. A lot of us are on call or needing to work 2 or 3 jobs or doing school and a job or whatever we're doing. We're often overtaxed. There are lots of reasons for this. This time of world history is particularly stressful, and the stats reflect that. Stress, high emotions, all of this stuff, all of that taxes mental energy, saps creativity, saps your ability and your budget to engage with things. So what do you do? What do you do when you're burned out? Don't watch the garbage TV. Don't just distract yourself from all of those highs. That is a blue light factory. Blue light increases mental activity and engagement. One of the reasons why these little screens are so addictive is because it activates, it gives you more stimulus than natural light does. So that makes your mind more active, read there, more tired, less energy budget to be able to do what you want it to do. So if you can cut out the video games, cut out the movies, cut out the K-drama that you absolutely love binging, cut out as much social media as you can. My family, we tried, largely failed, but tried to do from April to October this year, a screen fast. All the phones are parked on a shelf when we come home. You're allowed to spend 5 minutes at a time if you're standing there by the charging shelf. If it's anything more than that, you need to do it outside, just to get us out of the house. Now, it's not anything for entertainment. It's just what you need in order to communicate. So that's kind of what we were doing. Now, for the first 2 months, honestly, it worked fantastic. And there's a big reason why we ended up needing to, it was complicated. Life gets that way. But what we noticed is immediately we were gravitating, as this one therapist suggested, towards more, almost, it felt energy intensive, but it was much more rejuvenating recreation. Playing a musical instrument, using a part of the brain that I don't usually use. Singing, listening to music, reading a book. How many of you read as much as you used to before you got a smartphone? Although I realize I'm talking to a lot of people likely who grew up with them. So we try to take that time and do that dopamine fast. Don't do the easy snacks. Now here's the other part that seems really interesting. Eat right, sleep well, work out. These things increase energy. When I say increase energy, read give you more budget for willpower, give you more mental budget for creativity. These things absolutely are a superpower in life. They are shown to be clinically as effective or more effective than antidepressants. These are phenomenal and fantastic. We all know that we should be doing them anyway. Do yourself a favor as an author and stop trying to recover by putting your time into things that just delay the problems and the burnout, don't help you heal from them. Then they all come back the second you shut it off and you don't really feel better. You've just been away from them for a second. Not really rejuvenated, you just get a little bit of time away. That's not really recovery. That's just take a breather and then return right back to where I was. Now, when I started to make some of these changes, all of a sudden, things started to happen in my life. I would come home and all of my kids are sitting there reading on the couch. All of a sudden, all of us were starting to interact much more kindly with each other. Interesting note, it takes willpower not to snap at somebody. When we also feel tired and overstimulated, we are more likely to respond irritably to people in kind of a natural way of saying, hey, shh, go away. If I respond to you in an unkind way, you're more likely to leave me alone. And that's what the brain is looking for. I'm overstimulated, give me less stimulus. So find something. Go out, lose yourself in the woods, get vitamin D from the sun. It's much more better that way. much better that way. Much more better rest. Make sure that you're getting all your vitamins and nutrients. It's a lot better if you get them from the actual food. There are a lot of phytonutrients that help us absorb it better. Taking supplements helps, but depending on the supplement company that you're using, you'll get varied results and you won't absorb them as well as you will naturally. Stuff that we all know. But did you know that it can help you be more creative and a better writer? Now, I'm going to throw into that, as along with changing all of these things, I did say get enough sleep. I would suggest, if you're really, really stuck, get no sleep. Try getting no sleep. Sleep 2-3 hours. Just once. Every month. Don't do this often. It is not very healthy. But if you're really, really stuck, try it. And then what will often happen is that your brain is just so tired that it is throwing all of these creative ideas into your mind. There's no filter for it. It's chaos up there. Sometimes that actually jumpstarts my creativity. All right. So, included with all those things and the do nothing else tactic, I would say sit there till you write. This was a tactic that I used to get myself through college and through my master's program. If I was terrified of writing this term paper or whatever it was, I would sit there and I would just start to get distracted. I would get distracted. And sometimes I would just let my mind go, and it would go to all of these different things, but I'm not allowed to get up from here until I write. I'm only allowed to leave to go to the bathroom, not to get a drink, not to get food, not to go to sleep, nothing until I have written. And that was something that is really, really useful. I see someone writing on no sleep. I feel seen. Don't make it a habit. Use it as a carefully selected tactic. If you find that you're doing this by accident, consider your lifestyle, try to fix the routine. That's a huge, huge issue. Then finally, I would say, especially with ADHD, as much as you hate it, establish a routine. It will take you 10 times as long as anyone else, and it will benefit you 10 times more. Establish a routine. We tend to do it at whim. Whenever I feel like writing, I will write. Whenever I don't feel like writing, I will stop. But what I found is that, like I said, Muse on Demand is the title. I could spark those creative fits. I could create that urge and that craving to write by my behavioral patterns. Go back to what makes your brain happy and why you should do the opposite. It's trying to repeat what it did last time. So if last time I happened to have a creative burst while I was writing, this time I'm more likely to do it. And I began to teach myself how to do this. Now that's a combination of 3 books. The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Norman Doidge. The Mind and the Brain, Neuroplasticity and the Power of Mental Force by doctors, I believe they're both doctors, Ellen Bagley, I think, and Jeffrey Schwartz. And Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, which is a workbook by Dr. Stephen C. Hayes. I highly recommend that last one. It's geared towards anxiety and depression. It is absolutely good for mental discipline in all facets of life. Motivation, whatever you're trying to do, same with Willpower Instinct. Those are absolutely phenomenal books to teach your brain how to do things consciously that it's doing subconsciously. Put yourself in contact with those processes and have those committee meetings. Now, I want to add to all of that, get bored. Part of that is meditation. Howard. I absolutely know the name. The author of Schlock Mercenary. One of my favorite people of all time. I listen to Writing Excuses. I'm suddenly having a blank. But I think you know who I'm talking about.
Howard Taylor.
Howard Taylor, thank you.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I was like, Brian Howard? Howard Hughes? No. All right. Howard Taylor said that what he does is he gets a Coke, gets in a bubble bath, and sits there until he creates a thing. Now, in the bubble bath, that limits your options of other activities you can do and what distractions you can engage in, as long as you aren't one of those people with those giant reading desks or whatever. What this does, putting your brain into default mode, it allows you, first of all, not to fear boredom as much because you start to enjoy it. But second of all, it gives your brain an opportunity to have a committee meeting. If you look at the rise of anxiety and depression, like I said, thousands and thousands of factors, but consider this, it used to take 4 hours on horseback to get to market to go on a simple shopping trip. We don't have that anymore. That was without car radio. You could whistle, you could sing, maybe take along someone for conversation. You'd spend hours plowing your field, churning butter, manning the washboard, all of these things, very mindful, meditative activities. Lots of time to get on the same page with yourself. A huge part of stress and anxiety that we experience is when one part of my brain notices a problem and then another part of my brain takes care of it, but I don't have enough calm for this part to say, hey, we've got that covered. Or this part of the brain notices a problem and I ignore it, I push it back, I tell shh, shh, shh. Ask yourself this. These are all parts of yourself, so they have your basic personality. If someone told you, shut up, we don't have time to talk about that thing that's important to you, how would you feel? Most of us get upset and we start to make ourselves louder. So we have all this chaos going on in the back of our mind. Do be careful with meditation. If you're somebody who schizophrenia or bipolar runs in the family, you might experience the fact that mental quiet might actually be mentally unhealthy unless you have some guidance on how to work through that and on how to address that. If you find that you're very disturbed by quiet in your mind, maybe talk to somebody about that. I would recommend talking to somebody before seeking a prescription, depending on your circumstance, but do seek some counsel on that. All of the books I've suggested, they can help with this. But I did want to put that caveat, kind of a doctor's warning. I'm not a doctor, master's degree, but I am a licensed professional. So don't meditate if you find it very disturbing. Don't sit quiet if you find it very disturbing. But for the large majority of you, this will probably be a very effective exercise. Now, if you want to friend me on Facebook, Danny Potter, I'm not too difficult to find. And you can request my whole reading list. It's also a resources list. I just want to throw a few other ones out there. Many of you, likely, statistically speaking, ADHD, Taking Charge of Adult ADHD by Dr. Russell Barkley, world-renowned expert on ADHD. It will tell you about how this affects not just the tasks that you're doing and distractivity, but how it affects the way that you mistakes, the relationships in your life. YouTube channel, How to ADHD. Very ADHD friendly, 5 to 7 minute videos. She doesn't have credentials necessarily, but she is one of the most educated people on ADHD that I've ever seen. She has a very high IQ and found herself going through a lot of colleges and a lot of different jobs, not being able to achieve her potential that everyone told her that she had. So she embarked on this deep study of ADHD and was like, you know what, I'll vlog it while I'm doing it. It turned into a whole career for her. It's fantastic, and she's very, very good at it. I haven't read all of, but have been impressed by Atomic Habits by James Clear, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and The Power of Habit by Charles, I don't know how to say his last name, Duhigg. Those are all fantastic to read. I don't have the time to do the second half that I wanted to do. Very ADHD, I overprepared, which is kind of dealing with how to do brain hacks and engage the mind when you write. Again, if you contact me on Facebook Messenger, I'm happy to send you the scattered outline that I have, and you might find some useful stuff there. So I think now let's open it up for questions. Let's see.
It looks like the number one question has been if we can get a book list of the things that you've mentioned so far. I tried to copy some of them, but I did not get all of them, not even close. Is that something that we can find on your website?
Sadly, my website is not up and running yet. I started in June, but we had a series of family crises. But you can contact me on Facebook, and just please friend me. I love friends. I love to talk to my writing people. I'm in an area where the real estate is fantastically cheap, but that means there's nobody here and there's not a writing community, and I miss my writers.
Oh no.
Please friend me. So do that, and then I can send it to you. I can try to copy it here. I don't know if it'll actually copy through.
It should do. Oh, fabulous.
It looks like it will.
That looks great.
Okay, and then let's see. Shout out to the mantis shrimp. Let's see. Not my K-dramas. You don't have to sacrifice the K-dramas entirely, but do make sure that you're disciplined with them. If you find yourself binging, maybe you need to consider addiction. I do want to dive into that really quickly. Anything that we are addicted to, literally anything, I don't care if it's K-dramas, caffeine, methamphetamine, opioids, whatever it is, alters your ability in goal-seeking behavior, period. It helps us to mentally discount delayed gratification, such as I finished my work in writing. These things that speak more to our values, more to our sense of self-worth, we discount those. And the short-term things are elevated. Now, we tend to be bad in noticing long-term results and really good at noticing short-term. So it's very easy to get addicted to things. It's like watching a K-drama episode might not be as gratifying to you as finishing writing that chapter that you've been working on, that you No is going to be difficult, but it's going to be so exciting for you. It's a new experience for you. The one is going to help you feel better about your life and better in general, and is going to be honestly a lot better for your brain. Now, I'm not saying eliminate the K dramas. It's okay to have fluff, but consider it like a Jolly Rancher. All of these fun little activities is like popping a Jolly Rancher. It's empty calories with no nutritional value, tastes good in your mouth, it's gone in 5 minutes. It doesn't give long lasting benefit to your life. Not in the same way that these long term activities do. Everything in moderation, right? But consider if it's something that you are binging uncontrollably or something that you're really struggling to control, then it might be getting in the way of doing things that mean more to you in general. So maybe take a pause on it. Like I'm returning to all of the various activities that I used to do digitally. I have taken a pause, and like I said, it wasn't as long of a pause as it was supposed to be, but it was fantastic. And I am returning to some of these things, but I'm finding that I have an increased capacity to put them on a back burner. Writing on no sleep, I addressed that a little bit. Book Rex in chat. What was the first book? Howard Taylor. There we are. Okay.
I
All right.
have a question as well, actually.
Absolutely.
So I know that creating a schedule can really help when you have ADHD to try to return to something over and over again like that. What is your number one tip for starting making a schedule?
Be reasonable. Oftentimes we'll be like, okay, at 7:15, I'm going to start writing immediately. We start with baby steps. If you make a massive amount of progress, then it's going to result in one of two things, relapse or a miracle. Miracles are rare. We don't usually just change our life overnight. When I would be working with people in addiction, for example, it'd be the 7th, 8th, 9th time through rehab that they would start to pull out of it. And it's really, really important that we don't just say, here's my goal. Oh no, I'm so disappointed I didn't reach my goal. Track your progress, work on baby steps. When I started going to the gym, the first dozen times I went to the gym, I didn't make it in the door. It took me weeks to even just get my gym bag packed and get out to the car. Settle for progress. So I would say start reasonable, be reasonable. Don't be like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. Just make for tomorrow I'm going to do better than I did today. And you'll reach a point where you can actually stop saying that. Because if you're like, okay, tomorrow, like today I did 1,500 words, tomorrow I'm going to do 1,700. Look, maybe 1,500 is what you have time for. And if you're speeding yourself up, it might not necessarily be helping. But if you start reasonable and just move forward, and just kind of be really patient with yourself. Like oftentimes, like I said, we try it once, twice, 3 times, we give up. We're like, oh, I guess this doesn't work. Change takes time. With especially with mind in the brain, neuroplasticity, power, mental force, brain that changes itself, get out of your mind and into your life. These are little itty bitty things. And it takes, like, progress takes place over time. After reading several of these, I started meditating 10 to 15 minutes a day. That completely changed my life. It made me stop and take inventory with myself, made me recognize where my brain would go automatically, made me learn how to pull myself back to the moment, mindfulness, which is not an exercise of here's how you don't get distracted. It's here's how to recognize you're getting distracted and let your brain keep going while you pull yourself back to the present. It's not about stopping the thought. It's about watching it go by, like watching traffic go by. I am not the thought. I am not the emotion. That thought is just happening to me, and there it goes. I am staying put here. And so that's really kind of what that was something that made a huge difference to me. But as I started to do that, it knocked over so many dominoes that started to structure things. Not trying to sound like I'm in control, but with my level of ADHD and mental chaos, it's astonishing that I'm sitting before you in an office in a building that I rent professionally, and I am running my own, well, my third own business. And I'm not doing fantastic financially, but being able to be here, given where I was 12, 13 years ago and what I was struggling with then, is phenomenal. So yeah, just start reasonably, be patient, look for progress, and work from there. So that was a long answer to the question.
That is a fabulous long answer, and thank you. We have a question from the audience from Spencer Merrill. He says, I've tried to implement schedules in the past, even just 1 or 2 things at set times, but I tend to lose steam over time because life varies so much day to day. How do you set a schedule if life doesn't cooperate?
Story of my life. This is particularly, Spencer, I know you. Great guy. Love this guy.
I love this guy too.
And yeah, I think my guess would be that you are somewhere in ADHD as well. Routine is very difficult for people with ADHD. Um, Persistence is really important. I would also suggest that meditation is also. I would highly recommend Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. It walks you through step by step of how to, it talks about how we tend to identify with our thoughts and our emotions. And if we identify with thoughts and emotions, then to refuse a thought that just crossed my mind is to refuse myself. See back to, I don't like it when people tell me to shut up. My brain doesn't like it when I tell me to shut up either. And so even if we're just telling that to ourselves, we're going to resist it. And that part of the brain is going to fight back. You get this cognitive dissonance going on. It just gets loud in there. So this means that when we run into something that breaks our routine, routine is very, very important for ADHD, for autism, for a lot of people who are creative minds. Creative minds tend to be chaotic minds, not always, but often. So when we run into something that disrupts the routine, it can completely destroy the routine. It can get us completely off track. We can learn to limit that. There's a really extensive long list of how, but part of it is to deal with, separate yourself from what your emotions are and what your thoughts are and what your values are and who I am. We often say, I am depressed. I am angry. I am distractible. See how we're identifying with that. And then when all of a sudden something threatens that identity, think if I'm saying like, if I say I am a good guy and then I find something that I do that's hurting other people, my sense of self is shattered. It's really difficult to overstate how impactful that can be. We see the entire world through our own lens. So if our lens gets cracked and all of a sudden, oh no, I'm not who I thought I was, then our entire sense of the world is destabilized and we feel extremely insecure and difficult and disempowered. This can be what happens if we're fused with our thoughts and fused with our emotions, when we get disappointed that we're not meeting up to our schedule, when we, all these other things, we say, I am out of control, I am distractible. So we begin to see these not as things that are involved with my identity, these things that interrupt my routine are not interrupting my identity. And this is something I'm trying to give you like weeks worth of psychoeducation in just like a 2-minute span. A lot of people hear this and they go, well, my identity isn't really connected with that. But on a very, very subconsciously deep level, it really, really is. And so as we run into this, we try to establish that separation. But we also, as we're doing that, we establish a lot more conscious, observant understanding of what is actively going on moment to moment. And we begin to do so a little bit more dispassionately. It's saying the real way that it works is, first, I observe a stimulus. Second, I interpret the stimulus. Third, I evaluate it and decide whether or not I like it and how I feel about that conclusion. We want to stop it at, I observe this and I identify it, and then we want to choose what comes next. And being able to engage more mindfully with that process really makes a huge difference in all facets of life, but also in creativity, in routine, and in being able to say, okay, this has happened to me, but this does not disturb who I am. This has interrupted my routine, but I am not my routine. And we're able to not feel like our entire world is shifting as much, if that makes sense. It's still going to be something you're struggling with. And the best advice I can have, keep patient, keep at it, keep looking for new tools, but also recognize that change happens slowly. All right.
All right. So we are out of time for this slot. Thank you so much for presenting, Danny. This has been fabulous. Again, for those of you in the audience, please feel free to friend him on Facebook. He says that he would love to have us, and we're going to hold him to that.
Absolutely. Also, if you have any questions about mental health or whatever else, feel free to hit me up there as well.
All right. Thanks again for coming. We're going to resume in 10 minutes on the hour with a presentation from Jessica DeGeorge on the evolution and power of children's books. Thanks, everybody.
Hello. Hello. We want to welcome you uh, to um, to Evolution of the and Power of Children's Books by Jessica J. Day George, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to her.
Thank you so much. Um, I can only see my slides because the way my computer has chosen to share this. So just so you know, if you're trying to wave at me or something, all I can see is Helen Lovejoy. So, but we're going to be talking about children's books. So what I love to talk about this obviously because I'm a children's book author. I have written I have 16 books in print. I don't know how many I've written at this point. They're all young adult or middle grade books. They're all fantasy, and so this is something I'm very into. I used to run the middle grade, or well, the children's department at Borders. If you are old like me and you remember the fine Borders bookstores, I actually did the children's department at stores in New Jersey as well as Utah. Is something I'm really passionate about. So, and I'm fascinated by sort of the evolution and how they've changed over the years, and what's happening now is something I'm really into. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the best conversation starter I know amongst book people, especially writers, is what was your favorite book when you were a kid? Even people that are adult writers, I love to ask them this question. What were your favorite books when you were a kid? People remember how they found those books. They remember, oh, it was in the second grade class. It was my librarian, Miss Hazel at this school. It was my best friend in fifth grade, and I never spoke to her again after fifth grade, but I always love her because she's the one who gave me this book to read. They remember what the books meant to them, and they remember how the books changed them. This is actually a lot of this is coming from The Magic Words by Cheryl B. Klein, which I highly recommend. Um, it's writing great books for children and young adults by someone who's both written books and been sort of a power editor. She's edited and worked with some of the best children's authors out there, especially fantasy authors. So, inspired by that, I would like to tell you about a book. It is a book aimed at children, so anyone under the age of 13. So when I talk about children's books, I'm not necessarily talking about, a lot of people picture books, but I'm talking about anyone under 13. But the author of this book that I'm talking about has won several awards. There are delightful illustrations by an award-winning illustrator in every chapter as well. This book is about William. He wakes up on his birthday a little sad because no one ever remembers it's his birthday. He goes to the zoo as a treat, and that's where he learns that now he can talk to animals. He can hear them, they can hear him better, and consequently, he helps a zookeeper cure a lion of a toothache. He gets a job at the zoo as a special consultant. He gets to meet celebrities. He gets front row seats to the circus and rescues a performing seal that is having panic attacks, and that seal ends up living in his bathtub. He is featured in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and a very wealthy widow pays him $1,000 a month just to come and let her chat with her beloved dog. And she sends her limo to pick up William and drives him wherever he wants to go afterwards. He opens an animal preserve where old and sick animals from zoos and circuses can retire and recuperate. He gets cool new clothes. He finally gets the courage to talk to a girl he has a crush on. This book would never be published today. It is one of my all-time favorites, but even I admit there is no way you would touch this today as a publisher. And why? This book was written and illustrated by Newbery and Caldecott medalist Robert Lawson, who did Rabbit Hill, The Story of Ferdinand, Ben and Me, Make Way for Ducklings. And this book is called Mr. Wilmer. It is totally out of print today. Nobody ever knows about it except those of us who found it when we were kids, and it is so dear to my heart. It is his best book. It would never be published today because Mr. Wilmer, who is the main character of this book, gains the power of animal speech on his 29th birthday. There is no way you could publish this book today. Imagine handing a child today a book about a grown man called Mr. Wilmer and telling them, you will love it. Look at his hat. Like, but imagine especially telling a parent that you want their kid to read a book about a grown man who is in love with his secretary. Like, it just would not fly. There is so much wrong with that when you talk about that. Like, here, I want your child to read this book about a 29-year-old man who's secretly in love with his secretary, who gets really cool new suits and a good job. Like, during the Depression. Nobody wants that. But in 1922, and for the 25 years following, it did fly. This was a very popular book. It was made into a serviceman's edition that could fit in a pocket, and it was sent to soldiers in World War II. As of 1995, the Madison County Library in Rexburg, Idaho, still had a copy in circulation, and I know this from personal experience, but it has not been actively printed since I think the early 60s. There are no children in this children's book, except for the unnamed numerous children of Zookeeper Gallagher, but there's not even an accurate head count of them. It's implied that Mr. Wilmer, a fresh-faced 29-year-old, is the youngest character, except for his secretary, the beautiful Miss Sweeney. The two of them are at least a decade younger than anyone else in this book. Everyone else is at least in their 40s. And yet, these illustrations, the delightful plot, it's clearly aimed at younger readers. He goes to the zoo for fun on his days off, and he learns to talk to animals. This is a children's book. You would not give this to an adult at that time. I think they were pushing it, giving it to servicemen, but they said that they aimed it at the younger servicemen. I looked into the whole thing about servicemen's editions. If you don't know about World War II servicemen's editions, it's a really amazing thing, and that is actually how The Great Gatsby became a classic. It was Fitzgerald's worst selling book at the time, but it was also his shortest, and so it fit easily into these little they're very different looking. If you've ever seen one, it almost looks like a little postcard book, so it could fit in a front breast pocket of a uniform. And so they intended this book for like the teenagers that had signed up for the war. But publishers at the time would not have cared about someone saying, hi, I've written a children's book about a guy who talks to animals. He's 29. They would have been like, sold. He talks to animals. Because think of the books that were published around the same time. Dr. Dolittle, Mr. Popper's Penguins. There were so many animal stories. Talking animals, not talking animals. Publishers would have gone for it immediately, and they totally did. Please note as well that Mr. Popper's Penguins, the original illustrations, are by Robert Lawson. He was a very popular illustrator at the time, so if you had him on your side, you could publish whatever you wanted. So, but now if you want to write a talking animal story today, it would be about a child who had the power of animal speech. So trust me, because I've done it more than once in my own books. And when I pitched these books to my editor, they wanted to know immediately what the age of the human protagonist was. Because preteens like talking animal stories, and teens not so much, unless it's something like you are psychically bonded to your dragon or horse. Like, that's fine. But if it's like someone who talks to a lot of different animals, or if there is a zoo involved or something like that, that is solidly preteen now. And they want your main character to be that age. I had to make a case in my book, Sun and Moon, Ice and Snow, for her to have the ability to talk to animals in a YA book. I wanted her to have that ability because it's a story about a girl who falls in love with a polar bear. And I'm like, she has to be able to talk to the polar bear. And they're like, well, she could only talk to him. And I'm like, no, the reason why she can talk to him is because she can talk to any animal. And they're like, that is a kid's story. Like, this is not a kid's story. She's supposed to marry him. So I had to make a case for and make sure there was nothing cutesy about any of her conversations with animals, because talking animals are solidly kid stories nowadays. And that was my second book, but that was also when I found out the very specific guidelines that I thought maybe it was just for my publisher, but then I started hearing it more and more at writing conferences and from other publishers and stuff, that there are really specific guidelines to how they handle this type of thing and how they handle the protagonists in children's and young adult books. Basically, what I was told was that if you have a character that talks to animals, they can't be on the same intellectual level as the animals. Either the animals are wise older creatures who are giving her just a little bit of advice, or they are much younger and she is the mentor, the human is the mentor. If they're on the same reading level, that lowers the audience age. That's also where I was told the magic formula of figuring out your book's audience. Kids want to read up. They want to read about cool older kids. The magic formula I was told was that if the protagonist of a book was 10, the age range for that book was 8 and up to probably about 12. It gets a little more gray the older it gets, but generally they say, and I've heard this multiple times from both publishers and librarians, that if you have a book that is about 5th graders, you've got 3rd graders reading it, like in this. I still have this book. It's right behind me, actually. Nothing's fair in 5th grade. And she also did 6th grade can really kill you. And I read that one in 4th grade because I wanted to know what the 6th graders were up to. I knew what the other 4th graders were up to and frankly didn't care. You always want to read up. When you are 10, you want to read about a 12-year-old going to middle school. You know, when you are 12, you want to read about a teenager who can wear makeup or go on bigger adventures than a 12-year-old is allowed to go on. So, but that would make you think like, well, if they want to read up, if they want to read about older protagonists, that means they want to read about grown-ups, right? So not necessarily. They just want to read a little bit up. They want to read about the kid that already has the mountain bike, kid that gets to wear makeup to school. In good children's and young adult books, the emotional experience of the main character will be appropriate to the reader's age. It may introduce new ideas and new concepts and complexity, but it should not be so far beyond the reader's grasp that it feels like an alien language. So they want to read about something that emotionally they are getting ready for, a romantic relationship that they're kind of, you know, dipping their toes in, having crushes and stuff. So a more mature romantic relationship. But they don't necessarily want to read about the divorce from the perspective of the divorcing couple, right? They're not ready for that. You want to read about grown-up things like having a job, but not necessarily paying the rent for your blacksmith shop or dealing with taxes. So you want that complexity to be appropriate to 10-year-olds or 14-year-olds when you're writing about a 16-year-old. So, but not like so different. The other thing that I've learned from 20 years in children's publishing is that if it is a children's book, the child is the hero. And this is really key. Adults cannot step in and fix the problem. My brother-in-law has actually written a really amazing book. I have the manuscript here. It's never been published. It is about these alien bugs that come down and they are taking over the earth, and nobody believes these kids who saw their ship land. These kids are running around, you know, on their BMX bikes. It's got a real Stranger Things vibe. Like, nobody believes them. And he is also a trained artist. They're heavily illustrated. This whole manuscript he did is the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen. These bugs are like breaking into people's houses and putting underwear on their heads. It's super hilarious. Very like Diary of a Wimpy Kid crossed with Stranger Things and stuff. And then the kids find a scientist who does believe them because he also saw the ship land and thought it was a meteorite. And they find the scientist and they tell the scientist what's happening, and he takes over. And the last fourth of the book is adults deploying the military to contain the giant alien bugs. So I read this book. I wanted to love it. I showed it to my agent and everything. She loved it. And then she's like, the last fourth will never fly. She's like, she's like, I was upset about it as an adult. I'm like, yes, logically, that is what you would want if that was really happening. But this is a book that has aliens wearing underpants on their head. You do not actually want the grown-ups to swoop in and save the day. The kids want to solve the problems. The kids who are reading the book want to feel empowered. If they find an alien and it needs to get home, they want to be the ones to help it. They want to help ET. They are already being told every day when they have to get up, what they can wear, what they are eating, what they are learning, when they are turning in their homework, and all those things. In a book, they can finally feel like they are making the decisions. They are living vicariously through the protagonist, the protagonist is a stand-in for the reader, so they are the ones saving the day. They are the ones deciding to befriend the aliens or destroy the aliens or study the aliens from afar, but they make that decision. So even if there is a talking animal companion, if they are older mentally or physically, like a wise owl, they are a sidekick. If they are the main character, like in the books like Owls of Ga'Hoole or something like that, where everyone is an animal, developmentally that main character still needs to be the age or just above the age of your reader. If you have a 200-year-old dragon as your main character, 200 needs to translate to 12 or 10 or 14 in people years. They might be 200 years old in people years, but they are still the young one that's not allowed to leave the den and go flying and hunting alone or something like that. They still have to be a youth for it to be a children's book. But let's quickly go back to the beginning, all the way back to the beginning. Books published. No, I won't do that to you. Books published specifically for children have actually been around a long time. They have found extant examples from the 1400s. They obviously wealthy children, which did not surprise me, of course. If you could afford a book, if you could afford to get your child a book, you had to be wealthy. But what did surprise me was that they were aimed at boys and girls, because I just sort of assumed we didn't really teach girls to read. And again, by the way, just a little caveat, I'm mostly talking about Europe because that's the information I was able to find. That's my background, stories and fairy tales of Europe. So that's where we're coming from. But anyway, rich girls were also taught to read. So good for them. So books for the 1400s, however, were not Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, even though that title would have been something that would have made sense to people of the day. Instead, they were books of manners and morals. In 1691, a list of books for young ladies included Lives of the Saints, How to Run a Household, and the pastoral romance Arcadia by Sir Philip Sidney. Aesop's fables were recommended for boys and girls, and the stories of Reynard the Fox, which you see here, which were heavily illustrated and are still popular today. In the 1700s, we got horn books. There were almost no books for children. And it was thought for a long time that there were only books for adult and also no Bibles, which seemed really weird. It was speculated that since a Bible was very expensive, that people like colonizing America could not afford them. But recently it's been realized that it's because they were cut up and used as school books and disintegrated from where? Children's primers were cut up excerpts from the Bible, hymns and morality tales, and they would literally tear out the pages. They were literally cut out, and for their younger kids, they would put them in a horn books. They would take one page at a time of something, and they would stick it on this paddle that you held, and they would put a thin sheet of cow's horn over the top to protect it so you could trace the letters with charcoal. So that's why there's even still a publication for children's books called Horn Book. Like, this is a horn book. This is how they learn to read and write. But in England in the 17 and 1800s, they had fairy tales and wonder stories for children, which were bowdlerized versions of Perrault's fairy tales like Beauty and the Beast, The White Cat, Cinderella, because these fairy stories were actually meant to entertain adults in the days before TV, obviously. You would sit around and someone would tell you a story. So of course, if it was grown-ups and the kids were in bed, these were very sexual. They were extremely violent. There were no fairy godmothers almost. If they did have them, they did not bless the baby with rosy cheeks and golden curls. They did something very different. There were popular stories about Hickafrick, a famous figure who worked as a brewer, but also tamed wild horses and fought a giant. In the late 1700s, John Newbery, who was a printer, and the person that the Newbery Award for Children is named after. In addition to printing magazines and newspapers, he printed 300 cheap and affordable books, 200 of which were specifically for children. None of the actual books survived, and most were probably written by either of his two assistants. One of them, who was named Goldsmith, was known for writing ballads and poems. He literally roamed the marketplace, and for a penny, he would write a poem about you on the spot. So the one well-known story that they did publish is Goody Two-Shoes, which I loved as a kid because I was fascinated that she was a real person, and it was not just an insult used at little girls, but she was a real person. Anyway, look up the story. It's actually really quite fun. And anyway, John Newbery basically hired people to write stories specifically for children. And there was also a man named Johnson who was a publisher. And he also decided, when he saw Newbery, who was publishing basically these cheap, they fell apart. That's why there's no actual examples left, because they were the little golden books of the era. They were cheap books, published cheap, so that everyone could afford to read them. There was a man named Johnson who hired William Blake and Mary Wollstonecraft. Sorry, this is a picture by William Blake. It's some kind of angel, but it's like a butt shot of some kind of angel. I don't know. And Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of Mary Shelley, to create a series of illustrated books for children. William Blake was more fantastical, but also a bit weird, as you know, if you know anything about them. He wrote like very excellent poetry and stuff like that, but his illustrations were very much like Fear the Wrath of God type of stuff. Mary Wollstonecraft insisted that the books be taken from real life and correctly mold the character of the reader. Her books condemned cruelty to animals, greediness, and procrastination, which she considered the worst of vices. Procrastination was her nemesis. She died shortly after marrying William Godwin, who, along with his second wife, ran a less successful printing business that also brought out a series of children's books about Greek and Roman myths, the adventures of Ulysses, Charles and Mary Lamb's Tales from Shakespeare, poems by Lamb, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge for children. I think it's interesting that the Godwins were never commercially successful, but most of the books that they printed, their children's books, are still available today. Tales from Shakespeare I have upstairs. It's recommended reading for a lot of English classes. Poems by Coleridge. They published Percy Shelley's first book of poems, which is how he met and eloped with Godwin's stepdaughter, who wrote Frankenstein. So, speaking of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, and kids' books, there are some excellent kids' books out there about Mary Shelley now. But still, you know, what we have so far in the Victorian era are books that, though they're meant for children and have accessible language, accessible pricing, easy availability, are about procrastination and the sin of greediness. And were by all accounts, they were commercially successful. Newbery's books were wildly popular. Johnson's publishing and bookselling career was only tarnished by his outspoken support of the American Revolution. And the titles of those hundreds of books Johnson published, the ones the Godwins published, with those exceptions I named, are lost to time. What had sticking power? Is anything still around? Yes. So much is still around from this era, and I wonder if you can tell me, or at least see, what they all have in common. From the olden days, we still have Aesop's fables, myths, fairy tales. From the mid to late 1800s, we have Alice in Wonderland, Treasure Island, Little Women, Little Men, Joe's Boys, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, Tales from King Arthur, the Blue Fairy Book, Heidi, were all published that time. I can't quite wrap my head around it, but I feel like they all have something in common. Could it be they're all books about kids? Kids don't want to be told the evils of procrastination, Mary. They don't want to be told how to keep house if your husband only lets you have one upstairs maid, one downstairs maid, a tweenie, a boot boy, a housekeeper, and a butler. That's not what I care about. I don't have a tweenie or an upstairs maid or downstairs maid or a boot boy. But as Gabrielle Moss says in Paperback Crush, which I cannot recommend highly enough, I learned how to read from educator-approved books about pokey little puppies and purple crayons, but I learned how to be a reader from Sweet Valley High. The books that have come out that have staying power are books about kids fighting pirates, faking their own deaths, finding magical worlds. And this was not a new discovery. Nobody woke up and went, "What? Kids want to read about adventures and dragons, or maybe just other kids? Revolutionary." No, those books existed. But again, it was the adults who had control, like they did in the books. These books of the old-timey books and stuff, they were actually written with other adults in mind, because that was who published the books, that was who wrote the books, and that was who bought the books. That was what parents and teachers wanted, and that drove the market. Children's books were not a big business. There were no awards for them. There were no bestseller lists. There was still quite a large push going on to publish improving books for young ladies and gentlemen. So people's tutors were not going around going, "Oh, I bet these 3 boys I tutor who are headed for Oxford are going to love the story of talking animals and piracy." No, they were looking around going, "What is going to expose them to the Greek myths and how to be a virtuous man?" Like, those are the people buying the books. They were mothers educating their daughters at home. They were tutors. They were schoolmistresses. Those are the people getting the books. And by the way, speaking of, there was no award bestseller list. Think about the fact that the man publishing children's books was Newbery, who the Newbery Award was named after, like 200 years after he died. And the children's bestseller list, the New York Times children's bestseller list, only exists because of Harry Potter. So late 1990s, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone had been #1 for so long that publishers got angry and they branched off. So that children's bestseller list, which I have been on and was so proud of, actually did not exist until like a couple of years before I started publishing, honestly. So it would have been like, they started it in like 97. So think about that. There was no praise. The Godwins went out of business repeatedly, publishing, children's stories from Shakespeare for children to enjoy. It was not business. It was not good business. It did not make sense. They all also published other adult things in order to pay the bills. But sorry, lost my train of thought and my place in my notes. But there was quite a large push for children's improving books, young ladies and gentlemen, but the books that got read and reread until they had to go out and buy a new one because it got loved to death, or the library copy was checked out so much they had to go get a second copy for the library. They were these books that you see right here. These books had staying power. Little Women, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Treasure Island got requested over and over again. People wore out copies. The grown-ups liked them too, and so the kids wanted their own to read when they started to read, and the parents didn't want them smudging the pages, so they bought a second copy. So that is why they had staying power. That is why they became popular. That is why they sold millions of copies. But it wasn't all bleak and improving books all the time. Beatrix Potter existed, Winnie the Pooh existed, little golden books came around specifically so that children could have brightly colored, enjoyable books that were affordable. Most of the concern for making fun books in the late 1800s, early 1900s that I can find, however, concerned younger readers, getting them reading well. So these books were published for very little kids, specifically to get them reading, to make them think, oh, books are exciting, before they pulled a bait and switch and handed them Crime and Punishment. It wasn't just that the books weren't all that fun. It's just that they weren't aimed at readers between the ages of 9 and 18. There was some, but it was a fraction of what was for adult readers. So most of the stuff was sort of aimed at adults or aimed at very little children. The middle ground, the middle grade readers were if you could read all the words in Winnie the Pooh and got past Treasure Island, and all of a sudden it was, Bleak House and stuff like that, Crime and Punishment, War and Peace, all those were being handed to you because there was nothing in between, except a very few. The first young adult book was published in 1883. Three Vassar Girls Abroad by Elizabeth W. Champney. She did an entire series about these girls traveling around the world. And yes, it was Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants in 1883. One of them was real sporty and was like the captain of the field hockey team, and one of them was a rich debutante, and one of them was a bookish nerd. So in the early 1900s, May Baldwin wrote over 50 books with titles like A Ripping Girl, The Brilliant Girls of the School, which I have and is delightful. And it's all girls at like a junior college. They are 16, 17, 18 years old. They are sneaking out of windows to go meet up with boys. They are going off to France, even though their parents told them they couldn't go this summer. And it's the whole thing, you know. They're sending they have a friend posting fake postcards from like the Catskills. Well, they're really in France meeting fancy boys named Jean-Claude and things like that. Were their boys counterparts? I don't really care. They could read things like Treasure Island and Kidnapped, and it was time for the girls to have fun too. And there was definitely fun coming for everybody. In 1922, the first Newbery Award was given to The Story of Mankind by Hendrik William von Loon, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is literally a classic history of civilization aimed at children. It is very good, though. I mean, it sounds really dry, but it's actually quite fun. It's still around, of course. Interestingly enough, though, notice what the honor books are that year. So the very first book awards given to children were a book about pirates and Dr. Dolittle and some talking animals. So it's sort of, they had the collection of all the worlds. There was also Tales from Silverlands, which I couldn't find a decent picture of, which is a collection of fairy tales from South America. So we started having more, starting in the 1920s. The first Hardy Boys was published. 1930, The Secret of the Old Clock, the first Nancy Drew book, was published. 17th Summer, which is considered the first standalone YA novel, was published in 1942. Henry Huggins by Beverly Cleary came out in 1950. If you do not know about Beverly Cleary, I highly recommend her two memoirs, A Girl from Yamhill and My Own 2 Feet. She was a children's librarian who was having trouble getting kids to read, to like books, especially boys, because all the books were about things like finding hidden treasure, or they were fairy tales. And the kids that did not like that, they were like, I don't really like magic-y stories or talking animals and stuff, were like, there's no books about regular kids like who have the problems I have, or do the things I do, or do fun things that I could possibly do. And so she specifically wrote Henry Huggins, and specifically wrote all of her books to capture things about ordinary kids doing ordinary things, but they're not ordinary when that's your life. You know, finding a stray dog and adopting a dog is a cool thing to think about. I loved Henry Huggins so much. He gets his dog Ribsy at the grocery store one day, you know, and takes him home. And then he and Ribsy have these adventures that are just like building a clubhouse and making new friends and stuff like that any kid can get into, and is just fun and easy to read. And she wrote about all kinds of things like your older sister gets married and you're a bridesmaid, and like, what does that mean for you, a 13-year-old girl? Like all kinds of just sort of real world problems, but she does it in such a lighthearted, fun way. They have been consistently popular, and you can totally see why. But so we started getting into just everything started coming out that was specifically aimed at the ages between little kids and teens and adults. Oversea Under Stone, The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander. The 60s was just a really rich time for fantasy, but then also at the same time, you were still seeing consistently from Beverly Cleary. They were still doing the, you know, Hardy Boys and things like that. Judy Blume started in the 1960s with The One in the Middle is the Green Kangaroo, writing about really real world problems and things like getting your first bra in your first period. And so you had options finally as a kid. at your reading level of Oversee. You had Oversee Under Stone, you had Judy Blume, you had Mysteries with Nancy Drew, you had all these different options. If you wanted fantasy, if you wanted a mystery, if you wanted just a realistic story about a girl turning 15 and going to her first dance, like all those things were available to you. In the 1970s, Scholastic started creating their school division and doing their book clubs and their magazines. Dinah Wynne Jones started publishing in the early 1970s. The Choose Your Own Adventure books came out in the 1970s, giving kids even more choices and more control over the books, which I found the Choose Your Own Adventure books, frankly, kind of stressful because I'm the kind of person, and I was as a child, that even read like the information about how many printings there had been and the copyright info and just things like that. I read everything, every word that was on a book cover to cover. And so Choose Your Own Adventures weirded me out, but I know people who loved them, and they specifically loved them because it gave them control over it. They could decide the adventure they were having. You really were choosing your own adventure. Do you want to go into a troll's cave? Do you want to get on an alien spaceship? Or do you want to fight the aliens? Do you want to fight the dragon or befriend the dragon? Those options were given to you, and I think that is such a cool concept in theory for people who read books differently from me. Um, the 80s, we started seeing scary stories to tell in the dark, where they're like, oh my gosh, kids are freaky little weirdos and they love horror horror books and stuff like that, and more of those like darker stories. But then also on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Sweet Valley High started then, and you started like the Hardy Boys got seriously rebooted and they were using technology and things like that. And the Sweet Valley High books, by the way, were the first books, children's books, to hit the New York Times bestseller list. It was actually Sweet Valley High way back in the day, which really surprised me. You got lots of horse books. You got R.L. Stein's Goosebumps, and all those things started in the late 80s. Then you got this. Harry Potter. Whatever you think now of J.K. Rowling seems very off the rail. Thank you. At this point, personally, I don't want to comment on that, but because of her book, I was published. My publisher didn't exist before Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The New York Times bestseller list for children did not exist before this. And why? Why is this happening? Why is suddenly this orphan is everything's about it? Why did we go from here's one or two books suitable for children from each publisher to having thousands of books per year published by each publisher, awards, cheap paperback versions, fancier versions, on and on? I could tell you any answer and it would be correct. There are multiple reasons, but I'm going to tell you one answer that I think is the best one, the best factor. At its most basic, publishing is a business. They want to make money. As we moved through the 20th century, people started having more disposable income. They started buying more books for their kids, and the books that they're buying, the ones that stand out, are the new shiny. They have bright colors. They're more fun. They're repackaged favorites like Treasure Island and Alice in Wonderland, and this one comes with a little necklace of Alice, or this comes with a cool pirate bookmark or something like that. But when the kids are done with those, the new books have to keep up. No one's clamoring for Goody Two-Shoes' Guide to Financial Security for Tots. Not after they've read about Jim Hawkins finding pirate treasure. They are asking for these books specifically, and the parents have the money to provide them. And the parents are remembering fondly the things that they read when they were little, and they're not remembering fondly Goody Two-Shoes' Guide to Financial Literacy for Tots. They are remembering Treasure Island or the Hardy Boys or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And they have the disposable income, and the books are out there, and they are making money off of them. Libraries are getting more funding and are able to expand their children's department. High school became mandatory. It was not mandatory until very recently. And you suddenly have teachers looking for books that would be emotionally and literarily appropriate to their classes. And so they needed more options. There are more options of kids seeing themselves in books, different cultures, races, religions represented in books. And that is attractive to the kids, and they are seeking those out. And so the demand is coming up, or the supply is coming up to meet the demand. So that is sort of my theory in a nutshell, but I pretty much have to stop now because I wanted to take some questions. But we're just seeing so much and so much richness of like anything you can imagine that you can find out there, because they are realizing as well how much um they're finally doing studies of brains, really, and things like that. This is the other part of it. Publishing is a business, but then also they have now done studies and they have discovered that your brain lights up in the same places if you're reading a book with just text, if you are reading a book with pictures, if you are reading a comic book, if you are listening to an audiobook. So they are discovering that there is value in reading anything, in listening to any kind of story. They are finding no difference with kids' brain development between if they love Harry Potter and Guardians of Gahul and Wings of Fire as if they only read the I Survived true stories. They are still learning the same things from those books. They are still learning literacy, empathy, all those things, good things coming from books, no matter how they're getting it, whether it's audiobook, graphic novel, or just plain text. And no matter what the subject is, it's the reading that is important. And so those two things have come together, both the business side of parents being able to and wanting to buy their kids cool, shiny books, and the scientists and teachers providing information that all that's important is that kids are reading. And it's come together into this gloriousness that is this sort of like new golden age of fantastic kids books. So that's all I'm going to say about that for right now, because I'd love to take some questions for like the last 2 minutes that we have, and then I will go to the chat room and take more questions. So what questions have you got for me?
So we have two questions.
Too.
The first one was from Dieter.
Does anyone have any questions?
We have two questions. The first one is from Dieter, and she asks, could Mr. Wilmer have been a literacy help for adult struggling readers?
No, nobody's talking.
Oh. Sorry, I was half muted.
Okay.
As Dieter asks, could Mr. Wilmer have been a literary help for adult struggling readers?
What?
Could Mr. Wilmer have been a literary help for struggling readers, adult struggling readers?
I would say yes. I would need more specifics on that to understand really. But certainly reading that, if you were someone who was not super educated and getting your hands on that book and being able to read it, would definitely, it's the simplicity of the words and the fun of the story and his writing style that carries you along would definitely have helped an adult that was a not as confident reader, for sure. Yeah.
So the second question is from Steve. Where is a good place to find the requirements for different age groups?
From a publisher, if you are looking at a publisher, they should on their if you're looking to publish and you're like, what does this children's book publisher look at? That's what that question sounds like to me. They would definitely have guidelines on their website where they take submissions, or if you are able to query them and ask like, hey, I've written a book about XYZ, but I'm wondering if this fits your guidelines. That would be what I would suggest. Look around also at the rest of what they've published. Like look at HarperCollins, what is in the middle grade, what is in the young adult, and see what are the ages of the protagonists, what is their level of violence and things like that. Because every publisher is slightly different, but the sort of the 2 years thing is kind of a general rule of thumb that works.
So I think those are the only questions we have, and we're also out of time. So I wanted to thank Jessica Day George for the presentation, and thanks for all the attendees who have joined us to listen today.
I'm gonna sit in the cat chat for just a few minutes if anyone wants to chat or post any more questions or anything like that. So thanks, guys.
Great, thank you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Edge of the Universe. This hour we have Jim Zachariah, and he's going to be presenting on illustration and book cover development. If you have any questions for him during the presentation, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll collect them to ask. All right, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here to talk about my experience in book covers and illustration. My background actually is I was a printer, and then from being a printer, I transitioned to doing the print buying, and then from print buying, I started working digitally, learning how to use a Mac, and started doing work on that. And because of that experience, it landed me a job at Little Brown's book cover design department, which was great. I had already finished art school, and I knew a lot of the illustrators that Little Brown was using um, for illustration on book covers. So I was in illustration heaven, watching these pieces come in because I knew who they were, and I followed their work through at that time through magazines and actually going to bookstores and looking mainly in the science fiction fantasy book cover department, salivating over the great art that was on there. So when I was working at Little Brown, I did a lot of production work. I did do some covers. My very first cover, because they knew I liked science fiction, was to do a Star Trek cover. It's all about the Star Trek episodes and so forth. And from there was a second one as well. And from there, I'm going to see if I can bring you to my web page, or I think I might have the covers to show you. Sorry, they are my web page or my second page. It's a little screwy. It's not showing the covers for the Star Trek. I'm sorry. Um, anyway, so I worked there for about 2.5 years, and Little Brown had been in Boston for like 100 years, and all of a sudden they're moving. I said, great. So um, from there I went into another company that I was doing packages design for things like batteries and shavers and so forth. I said, well, I'm not really inspired by this, but I really need to get back into books. So I saw an ad for Shambhala Publications that was in Boston, mainly a publisher of Buddhist books, but they touched on other things as well. And I got into there as a cover designer. At Little Brown, I was doing a lot of back cover design. I did a lot of that, but they gave me front covers to do as well. But here, going to Shambhala, I was just doing cover design solely. My first cover for them was this Troubadour's Testament. And the thing about this, I actually did a 3D model of this lute in a program called Ray Dream Designer. It's a very old 3D program. And then brought it into Photoshop along with a photo of a flower and like that. So I had worked there for a long time, and about 22 years or so, and they moved to Boulder, Colorado. So I had my dream jobs in Boston, move away twice. So now I am freelancing as a cover designer and an illustrator. Although there is more illustration now than cover design that I'm working on. One of the highlights actually was being able to work on Dungeons and Dragons book of deck of many things, where I designed 3 cards, and I think I could show you that. Okay, here we go. These are the 3 cards I did for Dungeons and Dragons. Um, Aberration, which is great. I was able to do a Beholder classic character, the Dungeon, and Celestial. Um, going going back to history again, um, it's I really like the idea that I could do illustration and book cover design at the same time, so I could tailor my illustration and my design to complement each other. So it wasn't like I had to hire somebody else, although that has happened, to do work on something for book cover design I'm doing. I bring it instead of bringing in another illustrator, I could do it myself a lot of the times, but not all the times. I want to go back to my cover designs and just show you some of them and talk about those. Um, this was about a woman who had cancer. Um, it's a it was a great cover to work on. It turned out that I saw this big paint splatter piece, and I thought that might best fit this the design. Very active, um, you know, textures in it, um, and doc fit the cover, the book contents really well. Um, The Butterfly Hours by Patty Dan, who also wrote Mermaids, that they made the book, the movie from. She loved this cover. Uh, she, it was really nice to satisfy the author when you can. Yoga the Subtle Body. Um, I was looking a lot of actually rock poster design when I did this cover. There's a rock poster company called The Small Stakes, whose work is very similar to this. So that gave me the inspiration to for this particular cover. And the on the left, the colors of the chakras of the body. More of a modern, clean look. Take My Spouse, Please. Really loved working on this one. I did the drawing for the microphones that are attached together. It was a fun book. How to Be a Saint in a City. to be poets. So I decided to try to use those the circular discs you see along around a lot of paintings of saints and spiritual people as a motif. Yoga, critical alignment. This was a really fun project. It was I had a different cover design idea totally. Um, Before I did the photo shoot, I shot the photos of this woman in different poses. And wow, now this is one of those things that happen organically. I had a totally different idea, which I executed. I did the idea, but then going through the photos, I decided to marry the photo with the characters of the word, and it was just a breeze. It came just I spent very little time to do it, doing this, but it was actually doing the photo shoot that really gave me the idea for this. Compost City. This was another fun piece to do. Um, did this little icon of a compost bucket pail uh, there. Worked on this type in a program called Painter. Very painterly application, more so than Photoshop, really. This was easy to execute using that program. Um, on the bottom, I use Adobe Illustrator for the motif of the cities. Everything is God. I really wanted the word God to stand out from a distance, and have the rest of the type very small. So it has that poster effect, and that's how I think about book covers too, as a poster. So I try to be as minimal as possible, have a main element when I can. Um, but in this case, the main element is type, the word God. Sorry. Cool Mind. Um, this is another fun one. Did a lot of designs for this one. It was odd. Sometimes, it takes a while. It could be the 10, 20 different designs before you hit on one that just works. And it doesn't happen um, quickly all the time. Um, but yeah, just have this very, nice little curvy thing type happening here really expressed what the book is about. Changing the world from the inside out. I made these big hands basically, but also it nicely formed an eye shape here. Author really loved it. Great photography. When you can have great photography, everything just falls in place, and I love that triangular, steady shape. I love this triangle thing. I sometimes use that. I look for triangles for a lot of the times, and but this one was a beautiful photo, and just very simple type was all needed. The future is open. I actually took a photograph from a plane plane ride. As I was coming into Boston, this is what I saw for the clouds. I shot it with an iPhone, which I didn't think would really work, but the iPhone has such great resolution that it was large enough to use on a book cover at print resolution. So, yeah. Giant book of creativity for kids. I've not done a lot of, I don't know, children's uh, books. Um, it's really for the parents, actually. But this one, again, it had great art. I didn't do the art for this one, but I used the art for as a inspiration for the type I did. Green Buddhism. I was looking for a photograph that would work for this, and so many photographs of trees and so forth that has multiple different trees. There was different colors going on. It was very noisy. I really wanted something plain that the type could stand out on, and so although you have different greens here, they're not jumping out. It's not, this is not jumping out too much from this. It gave a nice flat poster photograph to work off of. When things fall apart, this was actually after this piece, we actually started doing a series that looked like this. Um, Another, very, it was a great photograph to work with, but it was hard to retype against. So I reversed it so that the photograph only shows through the title type. Okay, now here's a series of graphic novel covers I've done, in which is a lot of fun. 47 Ronin, Bushido. The artist that had done this drawing actually let me go ahead and tone it the way I really wanted to tone it. I really wanted it darker down here. Um, it gave some stability to the illustration and the design overall that I felt I needed. I really got the tones, how everything worked in here. As I remember, this one came together pretty quickly. I used the texture, wood grain texture for the background. And yeah. It's one of my favorites ones. It was sometimes when you have a piece of art or photography, you really don't know what to do with. Again, I looked to poster design for inspiration. I own a lot of poster design books. And it sort of looks like almost like a movie poster typography, but it really worked well for this graphic novel. This was a great piece to work on. Now, the odd thing about this piece of art was all pink in the background. It had a very light feeling, not anything, like the type suggests that's in the book. So again, the artist let me tone it the way I wanted to tone it, so that it would work for this cover. Um, when I presented this at a cover meeting, somebody said, "You really do want to be a poster artist, don't you?" So I guess that shows. Yes. Okay, Dao De Ching. This was tough. There was no single image in the book that I could really, say, okay, this is the book cover image. There was nothing there. And so what I ended up doing was I designed a type and Adobe Illustrator and combined a bunch of illustrations into one piece. Now they were all black and white, so I sent them back to the original artist who did the color on them, and then he sent that piece back to me, and then I placed it into my type design. Um, so I had the type, a lot of different art that's in the book. The editor loved it right away, um, and it was pretty successful. Okay, so that is that with the graphic novels. Um, I do have one story. I'm gonna, go back a sec. Um, um, the company I was working for was out in Boulder at this time, and occasionally I would have to go out there to work for a week or so. I was at a party, and one of the editors asked me when I'm going back to Boston. I said, "Well, tomorrow," and he said he was going to Boston tomorrow. And I asked for what for. He says, "Well, for the Boston Comic Con." And I said, and he said that the company has a table there. And I said, "Well, what for?" And he said, "Because of the graphic novels we've done." I said, "Gee, I've done a lot of those covers. Um, why don't you get me in there?" So I flew back to Boston, and next morning got up early and met him down at the exhibitors entrance of the hall, and he got me in. And so I had about 15 minutes before the show started, and I started walking around and running into artists that I knew. And I didn't know this, but a lot of artists that don't necessarily do comic art were exhibiting at this show. And so I said, "Wow, that's great. I think I would do it." So the following year, actually, the convention was bought by Fan Expo and was moved into the larger convention center in Boston, and that was my first Comic Con I attended. Um, Illustrated History of the Mandala. This was another fun project, showing how it would usually be drawn out first before they add the coloring. So I did a segment, which was hard to put together. There were three different pieces of art to make sure this worked. So, but I think the design came out really well in the end. Really happy with this one, and I love that pyramid again. Zen and the Gospel of Thomas. Yep, using Enso and Thorn motif, which I did this in Adobe Illustrator, and added a texture behind. Not a very realistic rendering, but you get the idea. This is a project where the publisher had an idea who they wanted to use an artist for this. So I did a very simple design for it. It turned out to be a series. I did 2 or 3 others of this using the same artist, different illustrations, of course, and it was a pretty nice looking series. I started following this artist and gave me the idea for a piece of art, which I'll show you in a while, called the Paisley Dragon. So because I've seen this type of thing done on an elephant, I used a dragon to put Paisley designs on. This was an anniversary copy. I was in Mind Beginner's Mind, which I just had, a single piece of art to work with. So I just did a blow up of it, screened it back, and just have the type here. Now in the actual book, this was die stamped, meaning that we had it was like a glossy piece of, it was like glossy ink. That's what it was. It was stamped on there with a material rather than printed in ink. Really helped the image pop. The background was a satin finish, also to help this pot pop out in texture. I love this piece simply for one image of the simple image of a leaf and the reflection in water. I played around with the tone a little bit. It was a bit duller, the original photograph, so I just punched it up a little bit. That's the other thing with book cover design too. I very often I found myself doing photo retouching, um, which also led me into doing art in Photoshop, and I said, "Wow, I can paint in Photoshop." But it was all those years of doing photo retouching that led up to being able to paint in Photoshop. Did a food restaurant cookbook. This was a fun piece to do. I did all the pieces of art in Illustrator. Um, Used some textures for the backgrounds. Everyday Ayurveda cookbook. Well, when you have great photography, things just fit. And I think the key into the design actually is this one piece here. It just fits beautifully. And I did small type because I really wanted I had to make the title pop in a way, but I really want the photograph to speak to the book. Garlic. This was a tough one. This was one where I was doing a lot of pieces of art. And some of the designs that I came up with what I thought was fine. It wasn't until the editor knew of this piece of photography that we acquired then it just fell into pieces. It fell right together. The word garlic I designed in Illustrator, having these sort of like diagonal lines going through it, give it some personality. Happiness trap. Wow. This was one of those things that again I was looking at poster design. Saul Bass poster design actually of I think if I remember right, it was the Capitol building that had a sort of like a hinge type of thing, which led me to use it's sort of a cross between a smiley face and a Pac-Man type of shape. Um, very simple solution in a way in the end, but that really works. And they sold a lot of these. At the time, it was over 500,000. It's past that now. A single white monk. This is a monk who was previously, I guess, a comic. And so I had to give it that, fun. And a lot of stories are fun in the book. But to give this fun, put a figure upside down, I think I've used this a couple times too in other books where I would show an upside down something to present the craziness in the text. Ken Wilber books, The Religion of Tomorrow. Technically, yeah, I found like this is a grayscale image. This fiery looking design here, and this was odd because I didn't design it in Photoshop. I just layered color washes, just big pieces of color right in InDesign and blurred it over a grayscale image. Worked really well. Integral Meditation, which I luckily found a nice piece of art that fit the text. Boomeritis. This is a lot of fun. And I had to think I was having trouble with this cover. And the president of the company just said to me, think 70s. So I'd done some 70s looking design following, using Milton Glaser as an inspiration for this. But then I just thought, well, how about just a smiley face and the word boomeritis as a smile? Author loved it. Everybody loved this. Another Campbell book, A Brief History of Time, of Everything, rather, where I just found some atmospheric texture, space texture, and added these. Don't know what they mean. Just added these vague shapes and so forth to express the text of the book. Trump in the post-truth world. I don't know what to say about this. I was using some silhouettes of Trump and so forth that they thought would not work for this book. There was another book who I forget the title right now that we got this idea of showing the Earth. But yeah. In the Face of Fear, got this crazy cloud photograph that worked really well. And again, as I said, in a lot of cases, I do look at poster design. This could be a movie poster design, actually, but so yeah, as inspiration. What's a very revolution-looking type of elements in here. It's about this time when doing this that I noticed I had about 5 or 6 covers I designed with black, red, and yellow. Didn't know that I'd be attracted to that combination, but a lot of times it just worked. I do love the colors together. Don't know why. All the rage. Yeah, it was hard to come up with something for this. I was using photographs, nothing was really working. So I just thought I'd put the word rage in the background to set all the title type on, which really worked well. It's an illustration and it's not an illustration. just the word rage really big. Almost like the love poster, actually. Now that I look at this, I know I didn't think about that at the time, but now looking at it right now, so it reminds me of that. Um, I just have to say, I really liked how this one came out. There's not too much to say about it. Except that the author really loved it in the end, and it worked. Wrestling with the Angel of Democracy. For some reason, I just thought of the Statue of Liberty as an angel, um, representing liberty, of course, and this worked well. This was a series that was difficult. It was difficult to find a photograph that had images, but it didn't have too much personality. It was almost like a photograph as texture for this series. I think yeah. Best British writing. I did this illustration in Adobe Illustrator. Clean design, nice. Also a series. Again, another series. On a piece of rice paper for the back, for the bottom portion of this. A little translucency to show in a photograph in. Really simple, clean design. About this time that I really realized I really like working on series of books. It's challenging to find art that works on everything. Um, yeah. This was another series. It was 50 years of books that the company was doing. I can't remember this very simple border design with the company logo on it, but not the name of the company on it. Maybe had an illustrator, an artist actually do all the ink pieces for this. Another small series. These books are very small. Actually, probably. Oh man. Three and a half by 5, maybe. I forget the actual dimensions of these. Having this piece of a container for all the artwork that was going in with a simple showing the series name, Shamal Library, on the bottom. A small series. What is that? Coloring book number 1 and number 2. Gnostic Bible. Got a hold of piece of an image of the piece of parchment, but then took everything out of it. Just dropped everything out of it. Then the actual writing. to use it as a texture for the background. Large G, but phonetically, you see, Gnostic. Here. So yeah, this was a fun piece to work on. Okay, so here's where I use another, one of those crazy books about this fellow's life being turned upside down. So I thought, well, just have an upside down title. This I found a piece of a photograph that I really processed to death to look poetic uh, for this cover. Um, and I liked the challenge of that. Um, sometimes you get a piece of photograph and it's just a photograph. But I like the challenge of transforming it into art. Um, this is another interesting piece to work on. I liked what I did in the end. I don't know. I'm not sure if it was actually great for the book, but I really love the cover. This was another piece that was hard. If I, how do you, express this? But the title, um, found a piece of art. Actually, I had to combine couple of pieces of art here, and then blur it in some areas, and get this sort of mystery type of look to it. But yeah, it worked in the end. Pirate's Passage. This was a nice, fun piece to work on. I forget what the actual art looks like. It wasn't. I colorized the art to have this sort of sepia toned, ancient look to it. I was supplied the artwork, um, and I designed the type. Okay, Confessions of a Pagan Nun. This was interesting. Again, another title uh, that was tough. I was doing all types of rough drawings and paintings to see what would fit. Nothing was fitting. Um, it was suggested that I just work on a sense of place, which is when I thought about the hut that they described in the novel. Um, Again, this is a very rudimentary piece of 3D art. I did an enraging designer and brought it into, of all things, Bryce, if anybody knows that 3D landscape software, to texture um, the object, and then worked with photographs for the background. Did a little painting for the side, almost like the pagan nun looking out of a window of her hut. This was fun. I also did the end papers for the interior, um, where I took the first paragraph, I think, and wanted it to be translated into Old Celtic. I think we had to actually uh, contact Trinity College. I think it's in Dublin, um, to help us with that, and they were able to. Um, and that was for the end papers, which I layered large. I can show you. I think I had the book. I can show you later um, what I did for the end papers. Um, Same by the same author. the Changeling, Finis Stewart. I did a reboot of this image for a print, to make a print. Um, I did a lot of the work in the background, and I'll show you that soon. Again, the same author, Black Elk in Paris. I really loved looking at his, excuse me, historical type faces to put this together. This is a little bit blurry. I do have a copy of the book next to me. I don't know why it's so blurry on here. I had to stop and say that I was to do this website. I did it in Adobe Muse, which was sort of like working in the page layout program, and that all that worked fine. But I can only view this website on a desktop. Is you use it if you try to see it on a iPhone or a tablet, and the whole thing just blows up. Uh, and Adobe actually did drop the software because of its problems. Um, but this was fun. I actually did this showing Beyond the Curtains. I did this bookcase there, and had little elves and gremlins coming out, popping out here and there. But then they told me that no, all the contributors needed to be on the cover. So I blurred all that out, put some light behind there, and had a space for to show the various authors for this book. Um, Here was a book that an author that was positive that I used a photograph on here. I said, no, I didn't. I didn't. I actually looked at a catalog. I think it was gosh, trying to name the company. Oh, it was a Crate and Barrel catalog, I think. To see one of the shares, and I modeled this in a program called Cinema 4D. Modeled it and textured it, and then did some post work and in Photoshop on it. Created this Photoshop texture of various things um, for the background. This was another hard one for some reason. Just trying to find the right photograph until I came upon this one, which worked well. This was fun too. I have various images of this heron. It was like it was large, one head. I had done a lot of comps for this cover until they decided this would be the right one. This was just from a clip art book. And here we are back again. So I been doing book cover design for a while. I went to art school a long time ago, and then really wanted to get back to doing art again. So I started, as I said, I went to a Comic-Con in Boston, and that's where I started to do, show my artwork. Some of it were pieces that I did book covers. I used on book covers that I rebooted in some way. And I'm gonna go tell some of the story of these things. Okay, the Listening Tower. Now, this was for a book cover called The Listening Book. But if you look up on Amazon and look up the Listening Book, what you see is this drawing of a little man of a man. Besides, when the man is not even this small on the book cover. What happened was I did a sketch and showed the author, and he loved the idea of this gigantic old-fashioned listening horn. he was a musicologist, the author. There's a book on on music and how you can make music using almost anything. And so the idea I presented to him was, of this man using an old-fashioned listening horn on a gigantic scale, listening to world music, and he loved that. Uh, but all he said he wanted was for me to colorize the sketch that I did for him. So if you find the listening book online, that's what I did. That's what's on the cover. It's just a colorized version of the sketch. I expressed to him that I really want to do it in this sort of way, but he didn't want that. So I did it for myself, which started launching my illustration work. Oh, okay, sorry. So I'll breeze through these. This was the reboot of Changeling, the Changeling. Another image that I looked around me, saw it, this pose as it's a yoga pose, and I used that as the idea for doing this piece, The Woman Who Filled the Earth. Um, Another book I read, A Harvest Home. This was part of a dream the main character has of Mother Earth and the Harvest Lord. Again, I listen to a lot of music, and a lot of music gives me inspiration for pieces, and I love Jimi Hendrix, and I thought I'd do Voodoo Child with a pregnant voodoo priestess. This is called an alien tomb, which is just something that I didn't have a reason to do. I just had this image in my head, and yeah. And here is the Paisley. Here's the Paisley Dragon. Again, Kevin Sloan, working on textures on objects, different objects, and actual animals. Gave me that idea. This is an actual line from a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. It said riding the Paisley Dragon through the Hollywood Hills, which is probably a drug reference, but I like the idea of a Paisley Dragon, so I did one. This is summoning the serpent. Using I like the idea of these Chinese painted walls and so forth, and use that as a motif to bring the dragon to life. The guitars have destroyed the world. This I actually found an album from the 70s that was called that. It was a compilation of album of different guitarists, Eric Clapton and so forth. Um, and they had a cartoon sort of thing, image on it. But I like this idea more. So I just want to do it for myself. I modeled all these guitars in Moto. I went online and found actual plans for guitar luthiers to build, diagrams, blueprints for guitars, and used those. Brought those into the 3D program as a base to start building the guitars with, and also gave me the fun way to playing around with composition once I had all these made in 3D. Route 66 over here sign, which and these guitar pick little ships here, and concert lights uh, from coming off the main guitar here. And I wanted to use Hard Rock Cafe logo, but I didn't want to get sued. So I know a lot of artists, a lot of musicians call their guitars axes. So I created my own logo for the Double Axe Cafe. This is the listening tower 2. Actually, not even sure if I showed you the first one. Did I not? Yeah, okay, this show, yeah, I did tell you the story of this. Sorry. Yeah, so I started making this as a series. And the next one I'm doing is the Listening Tower North, but I think that will be actually painted in acrylics. This is the Listening Tower East. This was for an EP for a band. Um, the EP was called "A Man with the Sun for a Head," so that's what I did. I had a lot of sun symbol tattoos put on his hands and feet. This was literally a lunchtime image, which I was playing around with, just taking craters, but having them, have civilizations on it, built cities built on them. This was an image for Mask of Mirrors. Not, it was actually for a seminar I was taking on an illustration. The Cyprian Cat, which is a short story in a book that I found called Sisters of Sorcery. Um, want to get the impression of a Cyprian cat, right? I'm sorry, Cyprian. I said Cyprian cat. Having the stripes of a cat actually being, shadows falling on the woman's face from tree branches, uh, or in the shape of right here, start forming cat ears. This is called Rope Ladder to the Moon. It's an old song by Jack Bruce from Cream. Love the song. Very poetic song, and create a poetic image from it. Thought about doing a ship as a rope ladder ship. Uh, this was for the Illustrators of the Future anthology. I think it was 38. This was a story called uh, the God. If I can name the story, It's gonna pop out of my head now. It's I'm gonna have to go back. Sorry, the greater good. I knew it had the word good in it, but okay. Yeah, this was the greater good. Sorry about that. Again, this is the work for Wizards of the Coast. Um, we are out of time. Okay, so sorry.
So I wanted to thank everyone, or thank uh, Jim Zachariah for showing us his illustrations and covers and talking about them. And I also want to thank everyone who's been able to show up today and to participate in the event. This is the final presentation for the day. So we'd like to encourage everyone to come to LTUE in February and join us live for the 3 days that we have it. Thank you for again. Thank you for attending, and also thank you, Jim, for showing us these things.
You're welcome.